All right, so ready to dive into the mind of Will Hunting.
Always up for a good character analysis, especially with the Enneagram involved.
I mean, who doesn't love Will Hunting, right?
Right.
The genius janitor, those intense blue eyes, that wall he keeps building up around himself.
Yeah, a classic character full of contradictions. And this analysis we're looking at today uses the sexual four type to understand him.
The sexual four, huh? That's one I'm still getting my head around.
It's a fascinating one for sure, full of intensity, magnetism, but also a lot of inner turmoil.
So where do we even begin with this type? What are their defining characteristics?
Well, one of the core elements is their defense mechanism, devaluation.
Devaluation, so like putting others down to make themselves feel better.
Exactly, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. It's not just about being mean, it's a strategy to feel superior, to avoid those deep-seated feelings of worthlessness. They want to appear taller, so they cut off everyone else's head.
Oof, yeah, that's a powerful image. And we see that play out so clearly in that Harvard bar scene, right?
Absolutely, when Will just dismantles that grad student with his wit and intellect.
It's almost painful to watch, but you can't help but admire his boldness.
Right, and that's the thing with the sexual four, their defenses can be seductive. They draw you in even as they're pushing you away.
So it's like this magnetic force, but with a hidden barb.
Exactly, and it's this dynamic that really comes alive in Will's relationship with Skylar.
Oh, their relationship's such a roller coaster, right? Intense chemistry 1 minute, complete shutdown the next.
It's a classic example of what the analysis calls seducing and rejecting.
Seducing and rejecting, that sounds kind of harsh.
Well, it is a pattern that can cause a lot of pain, but it perfectly captures that push-pull dynamic of the sexual four in relationships. They crave intimacy, but then they fear vulnerability.
But why push someone away when you actually want to be close to them? It doesn't make sense.
Right, it seems counterintuitive, but remember, their core fear is being seen as unworthy, flawed. So they create these cycles of closeness and rejection almost as a way to confirm their fears.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They push people away to prove they're unlovable.
In a way, yes, it's a defense mechanism that keeps them trapped in a cycle of pain and isolation.
And with Will, we see him project those insecurities onto Skylar. He accuses her of being a tourist in his world, pushing her away before she has the chance to reject him.
Exactly, it's that preemptive strike, that fear of being vulnerable.
Okay, so we've got this pattern of devaluation, this push-pull dynamic in relationships. But what about his relationship with Sean, the therapist? How does that fit into the sexual four?
Well, that relationship is crucial for understanding Will's potential for growth.
Because Sean's the one who finally gets through to him.
Exactly, but it's not without its challenges. Remember how Will interacts with Sean initially? Testing him, trying to devalue him, almost as if he's trying to provoke Sean to reject him.
Right, it's like Sean sees right through it, doesn't he?
He does, and that's a key element in the sexual four's journey toward healing. Finding someone who can withstand their intensity without rejecting them. Someone who can see their worth even when they can't see it themselves.
It's like Sean creates a safe space for Will by not playing into those power games, by offering genuine care and consistency.
Right, and this is something the sexual four desperately needs. That unwavering presence and acceptance.
Makes you think about the people in our own lives who provide that kind of safety, that space to be vulnerable without judgment.
Absolutely. Those connections are invaluable for anyone, but especially for someone like Will, who hides behind his intellect.
Speaking of intellect, that's obviously a huge part of who Will is, but the analysis suggests it's also part of his defense mechanism.
His sign is, it's not just a talent, it's a shield, a way to avoid true connection.
So instead of using his brilliance to connect, he's using it to keep people at a distance.
Precisely. It's like he's saying, look how smart I am. I don't need you. I don't need anyone. It becomes a way to preemptively avoid rejection.
It's like he's weaponizing his intelligence, turning pain into competition.
And that competitive edge is very specific to the sexual four. Other types might use their intelligence differently.
So for Will, it's not just about seeking knowledge, it's about seeking validation through knowledge.
Exactly. And it makes you think about how we use our own strengths and talents. Are we using them to connect or to keep others at bay?
That's a good question to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the emotional roller coaster Will goes through in the film. Those intense highs and lows are pretty hard to miss. Is that typical of the sexual four?
Absolutely. They experience emotions on a grand scale, both joy and sorrow.
So they're not just feeling things, they're really feeling things.
Exactly. And it's important to distinguish this from other fours. The sexual four's emotional intensity comes from a place of deep feeling, not from suppressing their emotions.
So they're fully plugged in, experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion.
That's a great way to put it. And for Will, we see this in those swings between grandiosity and despair. One minute he's arrogant, the next he's consumed by self-pity.
It's like he's on a constant emotional seesaw.
And it makes you wonder how much of ourselves we allow ourselves to feel. Do we shut down those intense emotions or embrace them?
That's a good question, and one we could all probably benefit from reflecting on. But what's interesting about Will is that he doesn't stay stuck in those patterns. He actually goes through a transformation that, according to the analysis, really exemplifies the growth potential of the sexual four.
Yeah, it's not an easy journey for them. Will's story really highlights that. But there are these key moments, especially that powerful scene with Sean where he says, "It's not your fault."
Get chills just thinking about that scene. Will finally breaks down, lets those walls crumble.
Right, and the source material emphasizes that this scene is a turning point. It's where we see Will let go of those defenses and allows himself to be seen, in his raw, vulnerable state.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize how often we try to intellectualize our emotions to avoid feeling them.
Absolutely. Especially for the sexual four, who's so good at being in their heads. But for them to heal, they need to connect with their heart, feel those emotions without needing to control them.
And for Will, that it's not your fault moment, it's like we're witnessing the core wound of the sexual four being acknowledged.
Exactly. And it's in these moments that you see the true depth of this type. When they can move through those defenses, access those emotions in a healthy way, there's this incredible depth and authenticity that emerges.
Okay, so we have this breakthrough moment, but his journey doesn't end there, right?
Mm.
What else can we learn about the growth path of the sexual four from Will?
Well, the analysis makes this really interesting point about how the sexual four, at their best, can channel that intensity and emotional depth into creativity and wisdom.
So they go from destructive to, inspiring.
Yeah, like they become these powerful catalysts for change because they've been through it. They can connect with others on a deep level.
We see glimpses of that with Will,
Yeah.
right? His mathematical genius, the way he uses language, all that raw potential. But does he really change? Does he just suddenly become this well-adjusted person?
It's not quite a fairy tale ending. Growth isn't linear. But when Will decides to leave Boston and go after Skylar, that's huge. Choosing to pursue a relationship despite the fear of rejection, that's a big deal.
I've always found that ending a bit ambiguous. Is he truly choosing love over fear, or is he just acting impulsively?
That's what's so great about it, right? We can interpret it how we want, but for me, I think it shows that growth is continuous. It takes courage to keep choosing vulnerability, especially when it's scary. For a sexual four, that's a huge leap.
It makes you think he's really taking those therapy sessions to heart.
I think so. Remember, all his defenses were about self-protection, avoiding that pain of rejection. So choosing a relationship with all the risks involved suggests a major shift in his mindset. Fear isn't dictating his choices anymore.
It's a powerful message for anyone who struggles with those same patterns, pushing people away, even when you want connection.
Absolutely. Will's story reminds us that even our deepest defenses can transform. It takes work and courage, but the potential is always there.
It's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. We're not just dissecting a character, we're seeing reflections of ourselves and the people in our lives.
It's about increasing our empathy.
Exactly. But there's one aspect of the sexual four we haven't really touched on much: envy. The analysis says it's not just about wanting what others have, but more like a longing for something they feel is missing within themselves. So how did that apply to Will?
Oh, that's a good point. It definitely ties into Will's relationship with his own genius. He has this amazing gift but resents it.
Because it sets him apart.
Exactly. Feeling different, not belonging, fuels that envy. He sees people with normal lives, steady relationships, and he wants that. That sense of belonging his intellect seems to keep him from.
He's trapped in a paradox. Pushes everyone away with this gift he has, but deep down craves connection.
Sadly, that is the struggle of the sexual four. But seeing that envy, understanding where it's coming from, can help them grow. It pushes them to face those defenses, figure out what's missing, and look for it in healthy ways.
So it's not about ignoring envy, but learning from it.
Yeah, like a guidepost for growth. Recognizing those deep desires for connection and belonging, then finding ways to fulfill those needs authentically, not through those self-destructive habits.
Which brings us back to those healthy relationships. Sean was there for Will, but those connections come in many forms.
Absolutely. Friends, mentors, partners, even a creative outlet can help. The key is finding those spaces where you can be yourself, be vulnerable, without fear of judgment. And for the sexual four, these connections are crucial for breaking free from self-sabotage. That's how they reach their full potential.
Looking at Will's journey this way, it's not just about one man's transformation. It reflects the human experience. We all struggle to overcome our defenses and embrace who we really are.
The power of storytelling, right? We connect with these universal journeys, see ourselves and others' struggles, and it gives us hope. Transformation is possible.
And the Enneagram is such a valuable tool for understanding why we do what we do, those patterns that shape our lives. What are some of the most impactful lessons you've learned from analyzing Will Hunting through this lens?
It reminds me that even our deepest defenses come from a place of wanting love and connection. The sexual four may take a more complicated path, but under all those walls, that intensity, it's a deep longing for connection.
Knowing that can change how we see those difficult people in our lives. They might be pushing us away, but maybe it's not personal. Maybe it's just their way of expressing unmet needs.
And that shifting perspective is powerful. We can respond with compassion instead of judgment, offer support instead of criticism. It creates space for healing and growth.
Instead of judging, we see the person behind the defenses and offer understanding.
And that helps them heal, but it also helps us grow. It expands our capacity for empathy and connection.
It's a beautiful reminder that even when we're at our worst, flawed and guarded, we all deserve love and belonging. It's something to really hold on to. Wow, we really went deep on Will Hunting and the sexual four today. So much to unpack.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about.
Before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap for everyone listening. Just hit those key takeaways one more time.
Sure thing.
Where do you want to start?
Let's see. Well, we started with that defense mechanism of the sexual four, devaluation. It's their go-to move. But it's not just about being mean. It's about trying to feel superior. Avoid those feelings of, not being good enough.
Right. And remember that scene in the bar, how Will uses his intelligence to put down that grad student? It's a perfect example.
Total classic. And then, of course, we talked about how those same dynamics play out in relationships. The sexual four craves intimacy, but is terrified of vulnerability.
Yeah, leading to that push and pull, the seducing and rejecting pattern. Will and Skylar's relationship was quite a roller coaster. Talk about intense. And then there's Sean, the therapist, who really represents that crucial element of healing for the sexual four. He provides this safe space for Will, without judgment.
Right. Sean shows up consistently for Will no matter what. And that acceptance is what helps Will open up, finally start to heal those deep wounds.
It's such a powerful dynamic. And then we also talked about Will's genius, how for the sexual four, it's not just a gift, it's also kind of a burden.
Absolutely. Will uses it to keep people away, to avoid rejection.
Builds a wall with his brain, basically.
Uh,
But then inside, he's actually longing for that very connection he's pushing away.
it's like a heartbreaking paradox, and that leads to that core wound of the sexual four, that feeling of not belonging, the envy they experience.
Wanting what they see in others, that normalcy. But what's interesting is that same envy can be a driving force for growth.
Yeah, when they tap into those deeper desires and start looking for healthy ways to meet those needs, the sexual four can do amazing things. They have so much potential.
It's inspiring to see how even our toughest defenses can become pathways to transformation. Will's story really shows us that healing is possible, that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength.
Yeah, it's a reminder that no matter how flawed or guarded we are, we can all grow. We can all connect.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive,
Yeah.
here's a little something to think about. Now that you have this understanding of the sexual four, who else in your life, whether a character in a story or a real person, maybe you can see them in a new light.
See those defenses, those challenging behaviors with more compassion. Recognize that there's a wounded heart underneath it all.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding will inspire you to be more understanding, reach out, and offer support.
Because we're all on this journey together, and connection is key.
Well said. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.